Welcome again to the K through 12 revolution. I'm Gary Marvin Davison, the guy who heads up the New Salem Educational Initiative, which is a couple of programs that I've told you about before. I want to thank Holly Hollister for being behind the camera, and my producer, Kevin Jenkins. Thanks so much to those two people. And now I want to introduce you to a quite extraordinary fifth grade student by the name of Georgia Brown Skinner. She goes to Jenny Lind. She happens to be the sister of Angelique Brown Skinner, who by now you have seen on this show as well, reading a variety of things. A young woman who now is probably slated to go to St. Cloud State University. That's Angelique. Georgia is a very talented fifth grade student. I have known her since she was 2 years old. And she has been in my program since she was in kindergarten. So she's just always had a lot of challenges put before her. When she was a very young student, she would listen into older students' studies, and she would learn a lot of advanced vocabulary, and we're going to show you some of that. So we're just going to show you how we often work together on Saturday mornings. This happens to be a Saturday afternoon that we are recording. We worked earlier in the day, and we're going to give you a little sampling of some of the things that we do. Now, she's in grade 5, but her math skills are more typical of the math student in at least 6th and in many cases 7th and 8th grade. So, for example, from the time she was in the 2nd grade, much as you saw with her cousin, William Allen, has known her multiplication tables. And so challenging multiplication is no big deal, and in fact, she is not only doing multiplication with multiple digits, she now is able to do them with decimal points. So, Georgia, if you would go ahead and do that one, and we'll show the folks the way we work on these. So that's 36 8/10, right? And 24 what?
24 tenths?
Tenths?
Hundreds.
Hundreds, right? So 24 hundredths. So you are multiplying 24 hundredths times 36 and 8/10. Now what I usually do is to go ahead, and as she works it out, I'm also going to crunch the numbers, and then we'll verify that she got the right number, and then very important, we'll see if she puts the decimal point in the right place. We are going to give you a sample of how she does this, and then we will be working on some percentages. Not only fairly straightforward percentages like 36% and 52% and that kind of thing, but also percentages that involve decimal points, which becomes a little trickier, but she has mastered most of that. Are you done?
Done.
Well, now tell me, did you get 8832?
Yes.
Okay. Where did you put your decimal point?
In between the 2 8s.
Very good. Now, Georgia, why did you do that?
Because there are 3 decimal, well, there's 2 decimal points and 3 numbers after each decimal point.
Perfect. So you move it 3 places to the left. Okay. Well, I think as well as you did that, folks can see that you can handle a straight decimal. Let's do now a fairly simple percentage. Let's make it 26% of 839. Show folks how you can do this. Now, Georgia, have you done any of this that we're doing on the board so far in your standard 5th grade class?
No.
No. So we're working on up quite a bit ahead, which is where I want my students. More and more in the New Salem Educational Initiative, it's a real family affair. I have 5 or 6 people from Georgia's extended family in the program, and what happens is I've known these kids since they came into the world, and they see their older siblings go off with me on one of the days, 7 days a week that I run the program. And in Georgia's case, her family has traditionally been on Saturday. And so these kids see their elder members of the family go off and they want to go. I've had people, little ones, cry because they can't go, you know, and how wonderful is that to want to go off to an academic program on a Saturday so badly because they see other people do it. When a child does come in later, and I have a lot of appeals to do that, so I do still accept students who may come in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, it's very frustrating to me because too often they're behind. They're not where they should be at grade level, so I try to catch them up as quickly as I can in reading and math, and then we move forward. But Georgia's never been in that position because she's known me since she was a little person and then was in the program since kindergarten. Okay, Georgia, 26%, what does that equal as a decimal?
0.
You can say 0 point, what?
26.
Okay. Now, again, remember this is tenths,
Hundreds.
hundreds, and of course that's important when we do decimals, right? Because, in percentages, because how would you read that?
2600.
Same reading, right? And so we know that a percentage means 26 out of 100. So we know right away that that really should be 26%, but working backwards. So, did you do this? Okay, and I don't usually put the 0 because it really doesn't add any value. If you did, that's fine. So I was talking, and I haven't done as much ahead of time, so you check me on this now. Make sure that I'm not going too fast. Is that what you got?
Yes.
Okay, where did you put your decimal point?
In between the 2 and the 1.
The 2 and the 1. Well, do you see any decimal places here?
In between the 8 and the 1.
Okay, good. That's right, because you just have 2 decimal places there, so you want it. How would you read that, Georgia? 218 and?
218 and 1400.
Perfect, good. So 26% of 839 is 218 and 1400s. Now let's do one that challenges that big brain of yours a little bit more. Let's just skip right on over to 0.28. How would I read that now? 28?
28 hundreds.
Hundreds, okay. So let's take 28 hundredths, but now we're going to call that a percent, which means that's a little bitty thing, right? 28 hundredths of a percent is going to be small, and I want you to show people that you know how to do that. So we're going to go 28% of 27. All right? So you show them now that you know how to move the decimal point and do what you need to do. I find that a lot of times when kids do get to this in school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, that too quickly they go over to calculators. Now when students get up in high school, if they're getting ready to go into the ACT, we actually bring out the calculator and practice it because they're going to be able to use them, and I want them to be able to do that adroitly. But I want my students to understand how to do what I call the real deal of math, and in fact, most of their time in school, they know the calculator by another name. It's called that nasty thing, right? That nasty thing called the calculator. All right.
Oh, we're filming. This one. I got the rest of the house locked up.
So the key here is going to be if Georgia remembers how to move that decimal point. That is something that's a little challenging for children at first, for students. Remembering how to move that decimal point, as many times as I say it, a lot of times it just takes a while to know that wherever it is, you move it 2 places to the left, wherever it is, which means she's got to make a little adjustment here, which typically she does very well. So we'll give her okay. Okay, so are these the numbers that you got? 7560756?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Georgia, how many decimal places do you have here? Did you have this on top?
Yes.
Okay, so where did you put your decimal point?
Oh, right to the 0.
Right here?
Yes.
Good job. Now, do you remember how to read this? This is tenths, tenths, hundreds.
Thousands, millions?
No, thousands,
Ten
ten thousandths. So, would this be the way I would write it?
Yes. 756, 10,000.
That's right. That's right. Very good, Georgia. That was great. You know, we didn't do this morning, and it's been a while, but let's show folks that you know how to read these numbers. When you've had a little review, it's not really that big a deal, right? Because this is another thing that I find in the schools. Many times, students don't really quite understand what a decimal is or how to read a decimal. It's covered very, very quickly when it is covered, and then they move on and they forget. And it can be important. So let's review, and this may take a little review, and that's fine. Let's see how far I've gone here. This is tenths,
Tenths, thousands.
hundreds,
Oh, wait. Tenths, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions.
millions.
10 million.
Good.
100 millions, billions, 10 billion.
Oh, that is so good. So on the bottom, I'm going to write what? What is that number?
10 billion.
Very good. So that's 10 billion on the bottom, and then on the top, I'm going to write all of those numbers. I'll put commas at the three-way point. And so what do I have there then? 2 billion.
2,578 billion.
Million.
989,000.
Yes.
762.
10
millions.
billion.
Billion. Oh.
So now let's think about this. You got it. And we haven't reviewed this in a while, but you know this. So this is 2,578,989,762 10 billions, right? Would you read it again, please?
2,578,989,762 10 billion.
Very, very good. Really proud of you. I think that's the math that we'll do today, folks, but you can see that she's quite skilled. This is just a 5th grade student, and she's doing things that I think Sister Holly and I, probably didn't do till we were in the 7th or 8th grade or something like that.
6th grade, yeah.
Sometimes these days they are doing some of this in the 6th grade, which is a good thing. So, I'll tell you what, let's do. You want to do what we did one night.
Okay.
I just think so much of Georgia's ability, and one of the things I love about her is that she's a lot like I am. She'll just do almost anything. If I say, you want to do this, she says, yeah, and that's great. She did the I Have a Dream speech at the annual New Salem Education Initiative banquet last June, just beautifully. And we kind of worked out this thing, and we went to the school board one night, and I was just showing them the multiple talents that this girl has. I almost want to call her a young woman. She's really getting in that direction. So what we did is, in addition to the I Have a Dream speech, I said, okay, Georgia, School board member I really think is at the top of the game is Tracy Nasbury, but she was late that night. And another real good school board member is Rebecca Gagnon. Comes from a very different kind of philosophical place with a different constituency, but she's hardworking. And I pointed to her and I said, now Georgia, if I say that Rebecca Gagnon is the quintessential school board member, what does that mean?
The essence of the essence.
The essence of the essence, which means something like
The very top.
the very top, the main one. I said, if Bernadette Johnson has a chance to become the superintendent par excellence, what does that mean?
The excellent of the excellent.
The excellent of the excellent, the very excellent. And I said, when I say silly things like, good snob, what is that? What am I saying?
You're using malapropism.
Using a malapropism. In the great man's speech, which we're going to do here in a few moments, he comes to a point where he uses the word interposition. What is interposition?
Interposition, in this case, it would be Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi put their laws in between the people and the government.
The national government. That's right, absolutely. They're saying that their laws in those states somehow were more important than the federal government laws, right? And then he uses a word that is kind of similar, but it has a different meaning. He says that he also used the word nullification. What is nullification?
It's wiping, in this case, it's wiping out the national government laws.
Right. So in that case, Alabama, Mississippi, and those states were saying not only could they put themselves in between, but they could somehow just wipe out those federal laws, and that's how we got all those nasty situations in the South. Okay. So I also took just a brief moment and I said, okay, Georgia, so now last spring when we did our performance of Hamlet, by the way, her sister, Angelique, was Hamlet, so I changed it from Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, to Hamlet, Princess of Denmark. Georgia was a character known as Osric, young Osric, who becomes a judge in a fencing contest. And so I said in that final scene where Hamlet and Laertes are doing their fencing thing, and I, as King Claudius, turned to you and said, Hamlet claims a hit, and Laertes says no. And I say, judgment. What did you say?
I said a hit, a very palpable hit.
That's right, you did. Your fourth grade self, you said that, and that was wonderful. What does palpable mean?
Palpable means you can feel it and see it.
That's right. Feel it, touch it, see it. Very good. A palpable hit. Okay, and then in about the 90 seconds or so that we had left as we did this before the school board, I said, okay, Georgia, I say to you today, my friends, that even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evidence that all men are created equal.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, right down there in Alabama with its vicious races and its governor having his lips dripping with the words of
Interposition.
and
Nullification.
right down there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will join hands with little white boys and white girls and walk together as sisters and brothers.
I have a dream that one day the valley shall be exalted, the mountains and hills shall be made low, the crooked places shall be made straight, the rough places shall be made plains, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
At that point, that night, the buzzer went off, so in a way it was perfect. And I said, well, now maybe you'll invite us back in January or February. January being the date of Martin Luther King's birthday, February Black History Month, and we'll do the rest for you. We are going to do the rest now. This is our hope. This is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we can hew from the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we can soothe the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this hope, we can work together, pray together, stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day?
I have a dream that one day,
If we allow this to happen,
if we allow this to happen, if we allow freedom.
well, that's toward the end. I know what you, so here it is. He says, we will speed that day when all of God's children can sing with new meaning, my country 'tis.
Of the sweet land of liberty, land of where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring.
And for America to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California, but not only that. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain in Tennessee. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain in Tennessee, Stone Mountain in Georgia, right? She usually corrects me when I make a mistake. I can see it in her eyes. That's great. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. Now you watch her bring it home. When we allow this to happen.
When we allow this to happen, when we allow freedom to ring from every state and every
hamlet and every village.
In every village, every city and every state, we will speed that day when all of God's children, black men, white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in that old
words of that old?
the words of that old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Wow. You are something else. Good job, George.
How old I am? I'm 10 years old. I go to Jenny Land Elementary School. I'm in grade 5. And what I want to be when I'm older is a fashion designer. And it's going great with me working here with my tutoring. And I think I can say that I've improved a lot from when I was in kindergarten. Yeah, so that's about it.
That's fine.
Okay. What are your favorite people in TV today?
You and Gary. And a lot of people on Disney Channel.
Okay. Okay.
And Nickelodeon.
Okay.
Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. Very good.
So, Georgia told you some things that she likes to watch on TV, but she reads too. She certainly reads a lot with me, some very sophisticated stuff, as you're going to see. Georgia, what book has made an impression on you?
Judy B. Jones.
What was that about?
It was, well, I like the Valentine's Day book. My sister had me read it over winter break.
Oh, okay.
And it was mainly about Valentine's and how they were getting ready to set up for Valentine's Day in their classroom.
Okay.
And Judy B. Jones got in trouble because she was playing around with the scissors.
Oh.
She was trying to make more snowflakes, well, no, more Valentine's Day cards than anybody else.
Okay. How did it end? Well, how was the problem resolved?
They didn't get to do anything for the rest of the day.
Okay. Okay. All right, so that's a book that you've read on your own, and now she reads a lot of things with me. In fact, she participated, as you've seen, in our production of a compressed version of Hamlet that uses all Shakespearean language. It's just a shorter version of the full thing. And then She's read, I would say, about 20% of the full play, just in the 5th grade now. And she went with me to Winona, to the Great River Shakespeare Festival this summer. And she was great. She sat by me. She didn't want to let anything get by her. She was always, what does that mean? And I would tell her, you know. So, you've participated in our compressed version of Hamlet. You've seen the full play. You've started to read the original. What basically is the issue in Hamlet? What's going on?
Larity's father's spirit came back and talked.
Hamlet's father's spirit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Hamlet's
Hamlet,
father.
the elder Hamlet.
He came back and talked to Hamlet.
Yes.
About what happened and how his uncle killed him.
Yeah, his uncle killed Hamlet's dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his dad seeked revenge on his uncle. So now Hamlet has to find a way to kill his uncle.
Basically, that's what he's challenged with. So whatever we might think about that, we have a guy who is given a challenge, who has a task in life, is Shakespeare's point, and we see if he takes care of it in a skillful way. Well, Hamlet waits and waits and waits until things get messy. And so we get to that final scene, which is the sword scene that we did for the people. So that's a real good summary. You can tell this 5th grade student knows a good deal about Shakespeare and about Hamlet. Okay, we are going to read at least some. We have another reading we want to do for you too. So in the hour or so that we have, we're not going to take up all of our time with this. But so in the beginning, in my compressed version, it begins with the elder Hamlet's ghost. And he says, I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the days confined to fast in fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house, I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul. Make you pretty scared, right? Harrow up thy soul. Freeze thy young blood, make thy 2 eyes like stars, start from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks, hair, right? To part in each particular hair, to stand on end like quills upon the porcupine. Why don't you read this next part?
But this eternal blazon must not be to ears of flesh and blood. List, list, O list, if thou didst ever thy dear father love.
Very nicely read. And then he says, revenge.
Revenge this foul of most unnatural murder.
Yeah, unnatural murder. Of course, no murder is exactly natural, but unnatural in the sense, who's going to kill your own brother, right? So, when it says eternal blazon, if something's eternal, what does that mean?
Forever.
Forever. Blazon, you remember what blazon means? What do we associate with hell? What's in hell?
Fire?
Yes, so blazon is fire, eternal hell. He's having to spend some time in the underworld is the point. Because he got killed before he could talk to God about his sins, right? So he's having to pay his time in a pretty heavy-duty place. It's a lot like hell. Must not be to ears of flesh and blood. So he's a ghost, right? Who has ears of flesh and blood?
Hamlet?
Hamlet does, you do, I do. So in other words, breathing, living human beings. And when he says list,
Like listen.
listen. Very good. See, it takes a while, even some things that seem relatively short and simple, to get accustomed to this language, and she's done it enough where she's really quite comfortable. Hamlet says murder, and the elder Hamlet says, oh yes, murder most foul. But soft, methinks I sent. When it says methinks, what does that mean? I think. I sent the morning air. Brief let me be, sleeping within my orchard, my custom always of the afternoon. Do you remember what an orchard is?
No.
If he's sleeping within his orchard, do you have a guess?
A bed?
Oh, well, you know that's a pretty good guess, but actually he goes outside to his orchard, which is full of fruit trees. Remember us talking? Yeah. A garden, yes, a garden of fruit trees. Very good. My custom always of the afternoon, upon my secure hour thy uncle stole. Upon, with juice of cursed Hebena in a vial, and in the porches of my ears did pour the leprous distilment. Leprous distilment, what was he pouring into the ears?
A poison.
Yeah, a poison solution, right? Leprous, poison, nasty, distilment meaning the solution of some kind. Thus was I. Why don't you take it from there? Thus was I.
This was I sleeping by a brother's hand, of life, of crown, of queen, at once dispatched, cut off even in the
Blossoms.
blossoms of my sin, with all my
Sound it out. That's good.
imperfection.
Right, so what is that?
Imperfection
Good.
of my head.
Good. Oh,
Oh horrible, most horrible, if
thou.
thou hast
Good.
nature in thee, bear it not.
Adieu.
Adieu, Hamlet, remember me.
Perfect. Really good. Adieu means what? Adieu.
Bye.
Goodbye, right? All right, so when he says cut off, even in the blossoms of my sin, what is sin? When your pastor talks about sin, what is
something that you did that was bad.
Yeah, that was really bad against God's law, something you really shouldn't do. So the problem here, you know, in those days especially, they felt that if your life was ended at the time before you had a chance to get right with God, that then that was worse than if you had been able to say in the end, you know, God, I know I did some things I shouldn't have done. I'm really sorry. I tried to live the best life I could. You know what I mean? So that's why, as a ghost, he's having to spend this time kind of working his way out of that sinful place that he was in when he died. Does that make sense to you? Okay, so then Hamlet says, oh, remember thee, I thy poor ghost. And then he says, why don't you read this part? It's the time.
The time is out of joy, of cursed spirit.
Spite.
Of cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right.
Right. So is Hamlet very excited about the fact that he now bears this burden?
No.
No. Cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right. Okay. I then move to, in my compressed version, to where the king and the queen are talking to a couple of people by the name of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, friends of Hamlet, and they're trying to convince them to go up to Hamlet and find out what's going on because Hamlet has started to act all crazy. Can you imagine? His uncle killed his dad, and now he bears the responsibility of making up for this situation. So Hamlet both is acting a little crazier than he really is, but you can imagine he is a little crazy. So the king says, welcome, dear Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, something you have heard of Hamlet's transformation. So call it sith, meaning sense, not the exterior, the outside, nor the inward woman I changed it to because her sister was Hamlet, resembles that it was. I entreat you, beg you both, that being of so young days brought up with her, and sith so neighbored to her youth and behavior, in other words, they hung out with her, right? And they know what she's like, right, Georgia?
Yes.
That vouchsafe your rest, I'll guarantee your rest in our court some little time. Why don't you take this next part? So that
by your
companies,
to draw her on to
pleasures,
and to gather so much from occasion you may glean
good,
without
whether aught
to us unknown
afflicts
her thus.
So if you are afflicted by something, it means you're injured by something. So what is it that afflicts Hamlet in this way? Whether aught in Shakespearean language means anything, basically. So whether anything to us unknown is bothering her. when you glean something, originally glean meant to pick out something from a bunch of other things. So when you try to glean what's happening in somebody's behavior, it means you try to sort through it and decide what's going on. You are doing beautifully. Why don't you take the queen's part here? Good youth?
Good youth, she hath much talked of you, and sure I am two friends there are not living, to whom she more
Adheres.
adheres.
I'm sure there aren't two friends to whom she more adheres. Do you remember what adhere means? I'm giving you a hint
Likes.
here. To stick
Connect.
together. Yeah! To connect or to stick together, right? And so in this sense, it means I'm sure there aren't two people to whom she would rather hang out with and to stick together with, right? Very good, okay. Why don't you take Rosencrantz, then I'll take Guildenstern. Rosencrantz says, both your majesties.
Both your majesties might by the
Sovereign
power you have of us put your
Dread pleasures.
more into command than to
Intrigue. Do you remember, Georgia, so Rosencrantz is saying, you know, you king and queen have been pretty nice to us, right? Because you could put your dread pleasures more into command than to entreaty. What would entreaty mean then?
asking.
Asking, yes. Making a kind of a begging type of request, you know? They don't have to do that. They're the king and queen. So he's saying, well, we really appreciate that. And Guildenstern says, very good, by the way. But we both obey and here give up ourselves in the full bent to lay ourselves freely at your feet to be commanded. And the king says, thanks, Rosencrantz and gentle Guildenstern. And the queen says,
Thanks, Gentlestern?
thanks, Guildenstern.
Guildenstern and gentle Rosencrantz.
Very good. And I beseech.
And I beseech you instantly to
Yes.
visit my two changed daughter.
Okay, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We've got another piece that we want to read for you, but we're going to skip to the end of the play where Georgia herself actually appeared in her role as Osric. And so, Georgia, I think we've said that we're going to begin this last part. I'll tell you what, we were doing 12, but I think for the sake of time, maybe we'll go on over to 13. And in fact, why don't we get up and just do a little bit of this? Kind of, you know, it won't be like when we had all the other actors, but the king turns to you, Osric, and says, give them the foils, which means the swords, young Osric. And what did you do?
Well, we kind of added a little
Yes,
bit.
you did.
And I grabbed the swords and I said, here you go, Laertes, here, and here you go, Hamlet.
Yes. And you were so natural. You know, I'll never forget, let me just say this very quickly. There was a day last spring when Georgia's cousins, who usually go with her on Saturday, could not make it. So she and I were working together, and I was just amazed at this child, this young woman. She was doing all kinds of great math stuff, and I said, you know, Georgia, I've always had an older student do the I Have a Dream speech. Would you like to do that? Yes. She had about a fourth of it memorized before we got out of there. You remember that? And then I said, you know, wow, you did that so well. I've never had someone so young, but would you like to be in Hamlet? And do you remember what you actually said to me? You said, this year? Because you weren't expecting it, right? And I said, yes. And you go, yes. She'll say yes to anything. That's one of the things anything good. So that's what I love about it. So Laertes says, this is too heavy. Let me see another.
And then we added a little bit more.
And Hamlet says, this likes me well. Yes, and so what did you add?
And then I grabbed a different sword. Well,
Yes, you
I
did.
took his sword and I grabbed a different sword and gave it to him. I said, here you go, Laertes.
Very good. So Hamlet says, come on, sir. And Laertes says, come, my lady. And Hamlet says, one, meaning he got him, right? And Laertes says, no. And the king says, judgment.
And then I said, a hit, a very palpable hit.
Which we've explained that you know earlier, and then what it means. Well, again, and the king says, Hamlet, this pearl is thine. Give her the cup, right? Meaning give Hamlet the cup. Now, what is he actually, he acts like it's a pearl, but it's
poison.
It's poison. And so Hamlet says, no, I'll play this, but first, put it aside.
hold on. But then we added a little bit more, and I grabbed the cup, and I gave it to Hamlet, and then he said,
That's right, you did. And then Hamlet put it aside, and then later, Olivia Pineda, who was playing the Queen, would grab it, right?
she
Yeah.
grabbed it.
Very good. See, she remembers how we did it in detail. She'll be my co-director someday. Maybe she'll be the whole director. I don't know. So Laertes says, a touch, I do confess. He gets stuck again. The Queen then says, the Queen carouses to thy fortune. And the King says, Gertrude, do not drink. Why don't you read the Queen's part here at the bottom of page 13. It says, Gertrude, do not drink. And she says, I will.
I will, my lord. I pray you, pardon me.
Right, pardon me. And the King says, oh, it is the poison cup. It is too late. Next page. So Laertes wounds Hamlet. They scuffle on the floor. And the Queen, though, has had the drink, and she says, the drink, I am poisoned. And Hamlet goes, oh, villainy, the point in venom too. Then venom, do thy work. They get on down here, and Hamlet says, I am dead, Horatio. Wretched Queen, adieu. If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, absent thee from felicity, which means happiness, a while, to tell my story. And Horatio says, you read, look at the camera and read the last lines of the play.
Okay.
There cracks.
There cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet princess. And
Flights?
flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
Right, so cracks a noble heart, meaning there goes a really, really good person, right? My friend. And when it says flights of angels sing thee to thy rest, where does he imagine?
Carry her to heaven.
To heaven. Right, very good. Okay.
Gary,
Yes.
you know when Hamlet, when we were doing the play, and the Queen died,
Yeah.
then you were the king, and my sister was the Princess Hamlet, and she grabbed the cup and poured it all over.
We could tell that part. And then we have about 5 minutes or so. So Georgia was just saying too, when we did the play, we had this part where Hamlet, who was not very happy with his uncle, of course, he stabbed him. And so I was dying. I was Claudius the king. And then Hamlet, before she herself died in the play, what did she do?
She grabbed the cup and poured it all over you.
Which, of course, made a big impression on the audience. They loved to see the tutor get water dumped all over him, right? So that was pretty good, yeah. All right. You want to stop it just a moment. So you've now seen this extraordinary 5th grade student do some 7th and 8th grade type math. You have seen her do a good bit of reading from our compressed version of Hamlet, act it out, show how sophisticated her vocabulary is, a big part of the I Have Dreams speech, and really understanding, you know, the great man in that speech, he uses so many wonderful metaphors, and the language is so rich, and it's a great teaching tool, and she just understands it and does it so well. Now we want to show you. What I've realized over the year, folks, is that students really need to start reading advanced material as early as they can. And by the time a student gets into the 5th grade with me, if they've started in kindergarten, they're ready to take on some very, very challenging material. And so, if they read a lot of challenging material, develop that vocabulary, get a sense of how to get the meaning out of a text, then by the time they get to the 10th, 11th, and 12th grade and they're taking those college entrance tests, it becomes not that big a deal. So they're prepared years ahead of time. So we're going to show you how Georgia can read from a text that is offered as a practice ACT reading test that juniors and seniors in high school usually read, and as long as she knows the vocabulary, and she's learned a lot of it by now, she can understand it. So let me start this out, Georgia. This passage from an ACT practice test is taken from Joseph Conrad's Gaspar Ruiz, A Romantic Tale. And it takes place after Gaspar, a real soldier, has been accused of fighting for the Royalists. Now let me mention something, because I haven't mentioned this in a while. When it speaks of Royalists, Georgia, when you see the word royal, who do you think of?
Royal.
Yeah, royal, at a court.
Oh, I'm not sure.
Well, Claudius and Gertrude were what?
King and Queen.
King and queen, right? So royal usually refers to that. So royalists would be the people who support the king and queen. Do you remember what this means? Monarch? That means king or queen, right? So if you're supporting the monarchy or the royalists, then you are their supporters, but these people that he has joined up with are actually rebels, and they're fighting the royalists, but he's accused of being a traitor and going back to the royalist side. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Gaspar Ruiz, condemned to death as a deserter. Condemned to death means punished in a severe way by being given the sentence of death. What's a deserter?
A deserter is like, in this case, you trade on something or a pact.
Well, if you're with a group and you desert, what do you do?
leave.
You leave, you run away, right? Was not thinking either of his native place or of his parents. What is your native place?
Where you were born.
Where you were born and
grew
raised.
up.
Where were you born and raised?
Here.
So Minneapolis is your native
Native
place,
place.
right? To whom he had been a good son on account of the mildness of his character. So your character is who you are as a human being, right? If you have a mild character, what does that mean? Do you get mad easily?
No.
No, right? Mild character means someone who's pretty laid back, takes things as they come. And the great strength of his limbs. What are your limbs?
Like your arms and your legs.
Very good. The practical advantage of this, practical means having real use, advantage, something that's positive, right? Of this last was made still more valuable to his father by his obedient disposition. Now up there we had mildness of character and obedient disposition. Disposition is a lot like which one of those words?
Oh.
Mildness of his character, obedient disposition. Disposition would be like,
Obedient disposition.
well, that's the one that we're talking about now, obedient disposition. And what I'm saying, now look at your text, when it says mildness of his character, and then it talks about his obedient disposition. Disposition is a lot like which word?
Character.
Character, right? So I want you to remember that. And then it says Gaspar Ruiz had an acquiescent soul. So soul then is a lot like which of those two words that we just mentioned?
Disposition.
And
And.
what word was like disposition?
Character.
All right, so what I'm saying here is a good writer, right, doesn't use the same word all the time. So character, disposition, and soul are not exactly the same thing, but they're real close, right? Now, obedient disposition. If you have an obedient disposition, what does that mean?
Obedient disposition.
Yeah, obedient. If you are obedient, what does that mean?
You obey anything your parents say,
Yeah.
and you respect.
Respect the elder?
Yeah, respect.
Go along with what they say, right? So obey, to do what you're told to do. Which word, so you got obedient disposition and acquiescent soul. Which word is a lot like obedient? We have acquiescent soul. Which word is like obedient?
Acquiescent.
That's right. Do you remember exactly what that means? If you were acquiescent about something?
You go along with.
Very good. Yeah, we've talked about that one. That's a good word. And see, when you're writing, and you're in a situation like that, you could write obedient, but acquiescent is fairly similar, so you could use that word, right? Okay. Why don't you read the next paragraph? But it was stirred.
But it was stirred now to a sort of dim revolt.
Yes, good. By his dislike.
To die the death of a traitor.
Now let me ask you, and you were good on this when I asked you this one time before when we were going over this. It said, Gaspar Ruiz had an acquiescent soul, but it was stirred now. What was stirred?
His soul.
His soul. Very good. That's a skill that I find that I need to work with students on to make sure that they understand the antecedent of a pronoun, right? Says it, well, it what? And she just has got that down very well. Says he was not a traitor. He said again,
He was not a traitor. He said, he said again
to
the soldier,
sergeant,
to the sergeant, you know I did not desert Esteban.
right,
You know I
remain
remained behind
amongst
amongst the
trees,
with 3 others to keep the enemy back
right?
while the dispatch was
No, look at that word now.
No.
Sound it out.
detachment
Right?
was running away.
Okay, now in this, you know what detach means, right? Detach, to tear off, right? Or to separate. What is, in the Army, what is a detachment?
To leave.
Well, you could detach yourself as a verb. You could detach yourself from the group. What this means is you have a detachment that is separated from the whole Army, right? So a detachment ends up being a small group of people, in this case, what kind of people? Who are soldiers. That's right. So a detachment is a small group of soldiers. He was accused of hanging back and not staying with his detachment, right? Lieutenant Santiago, little more than a boy at the time, and unused as yet to the sanguinary imbecilities. Do you remember what imbecilities means? Stupid?
Stupid action.
Yes, stupid actions. Sanguinary. In wartime, what do you see a lot of?
Blood.
Yes, sanguinary imbecility. So that's bloody, stupid actions, right? Well, when it says Lieutenant Santiago was little more than a boy at the time, was he an old guy?
He was young.
He was a real young soldier. Now, keep in mind that lieutenant is a higher position than sergeant. So, who is the sergeant, by the way?
Esteban.
Very good. See, you got to remember that. Remember who's being referred to. Well, of course, the sergeant is not going to like the fact that this young guy is in a higher position than he is, right? So, and unused as yet to the sanguinary imbecilities of a state of war, had lingered nearby, as if fascinated by the sight of these men who were to be shot presently. What does presently mean?
Like, happened present. Well, basically, a few seconds ago.
Well, or in the few seconds coming up, right? For an example, as the comandante had said, what is a comandante?
Comandante is like the leader.
Right. What word do we have that's a lot like that in English? Because this is in Spanish. Comandante, the commander, right. Okay, I think that probably that's where we want to wrap it up. Let me say this, though. I think it's very important that as you folks watch this show, you see the enormous capability of students. Right here in North Minneapolis, every single one of our students, as we look to the future, I want to have the kind of training that Georgia has had. I can't teach everybody. So we want to try to make the Minneapolis Public Schools all they can be. And I believe that if you go around to the typical 5th grade student, you're not going to see them functioning as Georgia functions. Now, yes, she is a really intelligent person, but she's also had really good training. She's had challenges before her, and ever since she was little, you've wanted to rise to those challenges, haven't you? That's what we need for all of our students. I'm just so proud of her. I thank you for being here. You're an example to all of the young children and students, older students too, out there. So I just appreciate you.
Can I say something?
She wants to say something. Yes.
If the school board is watching,
Oh.
I wanted to ask you this question. I was wondering if Jenny Lynn Elementary School could not have uniform.
I want to explain that just very briefly. When I took her before the school board, she did everything I asked her to do, and you saw what she did so beautifully. There was a question on her brain that she never got a chance to ask. She'd rather not wear uniforms, and so that was what that was about, right? Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.